Let me tell you about the time I found out my wife Sophie had been unfaithful. Yeah, I know, it's one of those things you never think will happen to you until it does. We'd been together for over 10 years, married for nearly a decade, and I honestly thought we were solid. Sure, we'd had our share of ups and downs like any couple, but this was never on my radar. That's the cruelest part, isn't it? You never see it coming, and when it hits hard. It all started when my best friend Ryan got in touch with me out of nowhere one evening. He invited me out for a drink, which wasn't anything unusual for us, but there was something strange about the way he sounded. Ryan and I go way back, so I can usually tell when something's on his mind. We met at a quiet little bar, got ourselves a couple of drinks, and made some small talk like we always do. But after a while, Ryan finally dropped the bombshell. "I need to tell you something, man. You're not going to like it," he said, staring at his beer like it was going to help him figure out the right words. I braced myself, knowing whatever was coming wasn't going to be good. He hesitated at first, clearly not wanting to be the guy to deliver such bad news, but then he finally pushed forward. Ryan told me he'd seen Sophie at a restaurant. At first, I didn't think much of it, nothing odd about that, right? But then he said she wasn't alone. She was with another guy, and according to Ryan, it didn't look innocent. Then came the part that crushed me. He saw them kissing. Not just a quick peck, but something much more intimate. Hearing that felt like someone had hit me square in the chest with a baseball bat. My first reaction was denial. No way, I thought. There had to be some other explanation. Sophie wouldn't do that to me. She couldn't. But as much as I wanted to believe it wasn't true, I felt a pit forming in my stomach. I knew Ryan wouldn't lie to me. He'd never make something like this up. A storm of emotions hit me all at once. Anger, confusion, heartbreak. How could this happen? Sophie and I had built a life together, and now she was out there with some other guy, kissing him behind my back? How long had this been going on? Was it just a one-time mistake? Or had I been living a lie for years? I started replaying the last few weeks over and over in my head, looking for clues I'd missed. Every smile, every kiss, every time she came home late or seemed distracted. Suddenly, it all felt suspicious. But I'm not someone who acts without thinking. As much as I wanted to confront her right away, I decided to hold off. I needed time to process and figure out what I was going to do. If my marriage was going to fall apart, I wasn't going to rush into it blindly. Almost immediately, my mind began spinning with thoughts of revenge. I wasn't going to let her get away with this, but I had no idea yet how to make her feel the pain she'd caused me. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Pretending everything was fine while I felt like I was falling apart inside was absolute torture. Every time she smiled at me, I wanted to scream. I couldn't even look at her without imagining her with that guy. And the worst part? She had no idea I knew. She carried on like nothing had changed, like she wasn't lying to me every single day. Then, about a week later, Sophie blindsided me again. We were having dinner together, just the two of us, when she suddenly brought up the idea of open relationships. I nearly choked on my food. After more than 10 years of marriage, now she wanted to talk about something like that? At first, I thought she was joking, but she wasn't. She started going on about how modern couples were experimenting with open marriages and how it could be refreshing for us. Refreshing? The woman who had been sneaking around behind my back now wanted my blessing to keep doing it? I couldn't believe the audacity. It was like a freight train hit me. This was her way of covering her tracks. She didn't just want to cheat. She wanted me to sign off on it. She was trying to spin her betrayal into something progressive and open-minded. It was disgusting. But I didn't let her see my anger. I kept my face as neutral as I could and told her it sounded like an interesting idea. For a brief moment, I saw surprise flash across her face, but she quickly recovered and smiled, like she just won some kind of prize. In that moment, I made a decision. By agreeing to her ridiculous idea, I'd bought myself time to figure out exactly how to make her regret every choice she'd made. She thought she had the upper hand, but she had no idea what was coming next. She thought she was in control, but if there's one thing I've learned, it's that people like Sophie always believe they're the smartest person in the room, until they're not. After agreeing to her ridiculous open relationship idea, I knew the upper hand was mine. The clock was ticking. The question wasn't if I'd get my revenge, but how. Sophie had no clue what was about to hit her. It wasn't enough to just catch her cheating and walk away. No, I wanted her to feel the sting of betrayal as deeply as she'd made me feel it. So I started planning, and it all began with Olivia. Olivia and Sophie had been best friends for years, the kind of best friends who shared every little detail about their lives. I couldn't say a single word to Sophie without it eventually making its way back to Olivia. But here's the twist. Sophie had kept her affair a secret from her. Whether it was out of shame or because Sophie didn't want to admit she was doing something she'd once called unforgivable when it happened to their friends, I didn't care. What mattered to me was that this little rift between them was an opportunity, and I wasn't going to let it go to waste. If I played my cards right, Olivia could be the key to unraveling everything, the perfect tool to bring Sophie down. So, I set up a meeting with Olivia under the guise of wanting to discuss Sophie's open relationship idea. Olivia didn't hesitate. I think part of her was curious, maybe even a little protective of Sophie. She probably thought I was a confused husband looking for guidance on how to embrace my wife's progressive ideas. We met at a quiet cafe, nothing too fancy, just the kind of place where you could have a private conversation without interruptions. As we ordered drinks and settled in, I could see Olivia was eager to hear what I had to say. She was ready to dive right in. I kept it casual at first, asking her about herself and Sophie, acting like I was genuinely interested in making this open marriage idea work. Then, without missing a beat, I shifted gears. I brought up Sophie's suggestion for some sexual exploration, framing it as her way of spicing up our relationship. To be honest, I said, leaning back in my chair, this whole open relationship thing is something I never thought I'd even consider. But, maybe Sophie's onto something. Maybe it's time to try something new. Olivia's reaction was exactly what I'd hoped for. Her eyes widened, and I could almost see the wheels turning in her mind. She looked caught off guard, but also intrigued. Well, she said, sipping her latte, Sophie has mentioned before that couples who try new things together can be healthier. She thinks it can be refreshing. Exactly, I said, nodding as though I were some enlightened, forward-thinking husband. I could feel the air between us shift. She was warming up to the idea. That's when I decided it was time to strike. Actually, I said, lowering my voice slightly. Sophie had another thought. Since we're all friends, she thought maybe you and I could, explore something together. For a moment, Olivia froze. I thought she might spit out her coffee. Her face was a mix of shock and hesitation, like she couldn't decide whether to laugh or run. Wait, what? She stammered, clearly trying to brush off the awkwardness. You're telling me Sophie suggested you and I? I leaned in slightly, keeping my tone calm and serious. Yeah, I said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I know it sounds crazy, but isn't that the whole point of an open relationship? Trying new things with people you trust. I could see the hesitation in her eyes, the way she was trying to process it all. She wasn't outright rejecting the idea. She was thinking about it, justifying it in her head. It wasn't the idea itself that made her hesitate. It was the taboo, the fear of crossing a line she'd never considered before. Well, I don't know, she said, nervously fiddling with her coffee cup. This feels weird. I don't think Sophie would be okay with it. Classic Olivia. Always trying to be the good friend, always wanting to do the right thing. But I could tell she was tempted. Trust me, I said, keeping my tone firm and confident. Sophie suggested it. She wants us to give it a shot. And since we're friends, she thought it would be a good idea to start here. I could see the cracks starting to form in her resolve. She was still trying to resist, but the temptation was creeping in. A part of her was intrigued, maybe even excited, by the idea of doing something forbidden, something she never thought she'd consider. This was about more than me. It was about the thrill, the rush of breaking a rule. We sat there in silence for what felt like forever, her mind clearly racing. Then I pushed a little harder. Come on, Olivia, I said, leaning in just slightly. Haven't you ever wondered what it would be like? Just once. No pressure. No strings. Sophie wouldn't even have to know. The conflict in her eyes was obvious. A battle between what felt right and what felt exciting. After a couple more drinks and a bit of playful banter, she finally caved. Maybe just once, she whispered, like she couldn't believe she was saying it. That's when I knew I had her. I now had the perfect weapon to dismantle Sophie. It was game on. Olivia didn't know it yet, but she had just stepped right into the middle of the biggest mess of her life. The best part? Sophie had no idea her best friend was about to become an unwitting pawn in my revenge. I could already picture the fallout, the destruction of their friendship, the double betrayal. It would hit Sophie harder than anything I'd felt. I smiled at Olivia, thanked her for the conversation, and walked out of the cafe knowing I had just set the stage for my next move. Sophie thought she was playing me for a fool, but she was about to learn the hard way what happens when you push someone too far. Now all I had to do was wait for the perfect moment to strike. And when that moment came, it was going to be glorious. With Olivia now in play and the stage set for Sophie's ultimate betrayal, it was time to shift my attention to the other half of this disaster. Her lover. He thought he was safe, sneaking around with another man's wife, probably thinking he'd get away with it. Well, he was about to find out what happens when you mess with the wrong guy. I brought Ryan back into the loop. He was already fully on board with helping me. This next step was going to take a bit of finesse, but Ryan had connections. He knew people who could dig up information no one else could. At that point, I didn't even know the guy's name, but that was about to change. After a few quick calls, Ryan tracked him down. We found just enough to put my plan into motion. From there, we arranged a meeting, making it look like a casual get-together. The guy wouldn't have a clue what he was walking into. Ryan made sure it seemed normal, just a couple of guys meeting up for drinks, nothing suspicious. When we got to the bar where we'd planned to meet, I sized him up right away. He wasn't anything special, tall, fit, with that typical smug look of someone who thought he was better than everyone else. I could see why Sophie might have been drawn to him. He had that polished, charming vibe. But I could also tell he was the kind of guy who'd crumble the second things got tough. And that's exactly what I planned to make happen. We exchanged small talk, ordered drinks, and let Ryan take the lead. The whole time I kept my cool. The last thing I wanted was to tip him off before the time was right. Ryan, as smooth as ever, started dropping hints, little breadcrumbs, mentioning dates, places, even the restaurant where Sophie and this guy had been spotted. I watched as his body language shifted. He stiffened, his shoulders tensed, and I could tell he was starting to realize we weren't there just to grab beers. At one point, I caught him glancing at his phone, probably wondering if Sophie had texted him or just itching for an excuse to leave. That's when I leaned forward, locking eyes with him for the first time during the conversation. My voice was calm, but every word carried weight. You know, I said, I've got this weird situation going on. Seems like my wife's been getting a little too friendly with someone lately. His face went pale. He knew exactly what I was talking about. Before he could deny it or even open his mouth, I pressed on. Don't get me wrong, I added, keeping my tone steady. I'm not here to make a scene. That's not really my style. I let the silence hang for a moment, watching the tension build. But there's something you need to know. I leaned back slightly, giving him just enough space to stew in his own panic before delivering the next blow. I know about your little rendezvous with her. And here's the thing, it's not going to happen. His eyes widened, caught completely off guard. What are you talking about? He stammered, trying to play dumb, but the tremble in his voice gave him away. He was nervous, and he had every reason to be. Ryan, always the master of timing, leaned back in his chair and spoke, his tone sharp and serious. We're not asking, he said. We're telling you. Cancel the date. Stop answering her calls. If you don't, things are going to get uncomfortable. And trust me, you don't want that. The guy fumbled with his drink, trying to mask the fact that his hands were shaking. It was almost pitiful to watch how quickly his confident exterior crumbled. He could tell we weren't bluffing, that this wasn't some empty threat. He was scrambling, trying to figure out his next move. But the truth was, he didn't have any options. His only play was to back off and hope we didn't escalate things further. For a few painfully long moments, he sat there frozen, looking like a deer caught in the headlights. Finally, he muttered, Yeah, all right. I won't show up. I I won't answer her anymore. I could already see the gears turning in his head. He wasn't just afraid of me and Ryan, he was starting to realize just how deep he was in this mess. The fear of the unknown was eating him alive. Perfect. Ryan and I exchanged a brief glance, a silent acknowledgement that we'd gotten what we came for. As we walked out of the bar, I knew I had just taken the first major step toward shattering Sophie's little fantasy world. The guy practically bolted out of the bar, looking like he couldn't get away fast enough. Watching him leave, I felt a rush of satisfaction. Sophie had no idea what was coming. I could already picture her sitting there alone, waiting for her lover to show up, completely clueless that her little affair was about to unravel. As Ryan and I finished our drinks, he chuckled. Man, did you see his face? Looked like he was about to piss himself. I laughed too, but deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Sure, scaring him off felt good, but it wasn't enough. Sophie wasn't going to escape this mess so easily. This was only the beginning. On the drive home, my mind was racing. Thoughts of what came next swirled in my head. The revenge, the unraveling of her trust, everything I had been planning for weeks. It all felt so close now, yet still just out of reach. But knowing her lover had been scared off was a small victory. She was about to experience frustration on a level she'd never imagined, and I was going to savor every minute of it. Now that he was out of the picture, it was time to turn the heat up on Sophie. I could already imagine her sitting there, confused, wondering why he hadn't shown up. Maybe she'd start doubting him or even start doubting herself. The irony of it all was almost too perfect. But this was only the start of her nightmare. What came next would tear her world apart, piece by piece. And I wasn't going to sit back and watch it happen from a distance. I planned to be right in the thick of it, making sure every moment of her downfall stung as much as possible. I'll never forget the night it all came crashing down. It was the night I'd been working toward for weeks, and honestly, I hadn't felt this kind of excitement in a long time. Sophie, blissfully unaware of the storm I was about to unleash, went out for her date like it was business as usual. She thought she was off for another evening with her lover, playing me for a fool, pretending that I had actually bought into her ridiculous open relationship idea. What she didn't know was that her boy toy wasn't showing up. He was probably too busy trying to keep his nerves in check after the talk Ryan and I had with him. And me? I had no intention of sitting at home feeling sorry for myself while Sophie played her games. I was done being the clueless, passive husband. I'd set everything up just the way I wanted. After sending her off with a weak kiss and a fake smile, I called Olivia over. Olivia walked in, completely unaware of what was about to go down. She thought we were going to explore the idea of the open relationship Sophie had suggested. I could see the hesitation in her eyes, but I knew it wouldn't last long. Once the wine started flowing, the mood shifted. I made sure the atmosphere was perfect. Candles lit, soft music playing, all the things that used to be exclusive to Sophie and me. Tonight, it wasn't Sophie's anymore. Tonight, it was mine to share with Olivia. We chatted, laughed, and sipped our drinks. Slowly but surely, the conversation drifted to deeper, more personal topics. The tension in the room was palpable. I could feel Olivia waiting for me to make the first move, so I did. The shift was swift. One moment we were talking, and the next we were all over each other. This wasn't about Olivia. It was about sending a message. It was about Sophie, about taking something back from her, about proving that I could play this game too. It wasn't about lust. It was about revenge. And just as things reached their peak, I heard the sound of the front door opening. Sophie was back earlier than expected, likely because her date with lover boy hadn't gone as planned. I heard the click of the door and the sound of her heels on the floor. But I didn't panic. There was no rush to cover anything up, no shame to hide. I wanted her to see this. I wanted her to walk in and feel the betrayal I had been living with for weeks. The bedroom door swung open, and there she was, standing in the doorway. I'll never forget the look on her face. A mixture of shock, anger, and disbelief. Her mouth hung open, her eyes wide, as if she couldn't comprehend what she was seeing. She never thought I was capable of something like this. But there I was with her best friend in our bed. What the hell? she shouted, her voice shaking with disbelief. Olivia, frozen in panic, scrambled to grab her clothes. Her face turned bright red as she stammered, "Sophie, I didn't mean." She couldn't even look Sophie in the eye as she tried to back out of the room. Without another word, Olivia bolted, practically running for her life. That left me and Sophie alone, face to face, with nowhere to hide. The door slammed behind Olivia, leaving an eerie silence. It felt like a ticking clock before the explosion. "You filthy bastard!" Sophie screamed, charging toward me with her fists clenched. The fury in her eyes burned like a fire I'd never seen before. The fire I once loved in her eyes was now burning hot. But this time, it was directed squarely at me. "You slept with my best friend in our bed. How dare you, you hypocrite!" She spat, her voice shaking with fury. I couldn't help but let out a low chuckle. The sheer irony of her words was almost too much to bear. She was standing there, accusing me of the exact thing she'd been doing for weeks, completely blind to her own hypocrisy. I climbed out of bed, deliberately leaving myself exposed, wanting her to feel the full weight of the betrayal, just like I had. "Are you serious right now, Sophie?" I shot back, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "You've been sneaking around with some guy behind my back, and you think I'm the bad guy here? That's different," she screamed, her anger escalating. "We agreed to an open relationship, Ethan. You crossed the line. Olivia is my best friend," she added, as though that somehow made her betrayal more forgivable than mine. I laughed again, this time louder. "An open relationship? That's rich coming from you?" I scoffed, stepping closer to her. "Don't even try to play the victim here, Sophie. I know about your affair. I've known for weeks. Did you really think I wouldn't figure it out? Did you think I didn't know exactly what you were up to?" Her face drained of color. I could see the shock flicker in her eyes as she realized I'd been ahead of her the entire time. "Wait! What?" she muttered, her voice trembling. "You knew." "Of course I knew," I snapped, stepping even closer, letting my anger spill out at last. "I knew the second Ryan told me about seeing you with that guy. I knew every time you came home smelling like him. And then you had the audacity to suggest this open relationship, like I'd actually fall for it." Her face twisted in rage, but beneath the fury, something else began to show: fear. Real fear. Fear that she had lost control. Fear that she was now caught in the web she'd spun. You set this whole thing up, didn't you?" she asked, her voice trembling as the realization hit. I nodded, letting the satisfaction show on my face. "You're damn right I did," I said coldly. "You thought you could mess around behind my back, treat me like a fool?"
"No, Sophie."
"This is your mess. You made this bed, and now you're going to lie in it." Her face crumpled, and for the first time, I saw a hint of vulnerability in her. But it was far too late for tears, far too late for apologies. We had crossed the point of no return. She let out a guttural scream of pure rage, then stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her so hard that the walls seemed to tremble. I stood there for a moment, taking it all in, trying to process what had just happened. This should have felt like a victory, the moment I had been working toward for weeks. But all I felt was emptiness. Yes, I had my revenge. But at what cost? My marriage? My life as I knew it? I had burned everything to the ground, and now there was nothing left but ashes. After the storm passed, I knew what came next. There would be no rebuilding, no fixing what had been broken. Sophie and I were beyond repair. As she simmered in the aftermath of what she'd walked in on, I calmly delivered the words I knew she never thought she'd hear. "I'm filing for divorce," I said, my voice steady, devoid of emotion. I braced for her to lash out again, to start screaming, throwing things, maybe even begging. But for the first time that night, Sophie stood there in stunned silence. She hadn't expected this. She probably thought I'd be the one pleading with her to stay, trying to salvage what little was left of our marriage. But no, the moment she betrayed me, it was over. I had only been waiting for the right time to act, and that time had come. "You can't be serious," she said finally. her voice shaky, tinged with desperation. "Ethan, don't do this. We can work through this. The open relationship was supposed to help us, not destroy everything." I couldn't help but laugh. She still didn't get it. She couldn't see that her so-called open relationship wasn't a solution. It was just a way to justify her lies, a way to dress up her affair as something progressive. "Help us," I said, my voice cold. "Stop pretending, Sophie. You didn't want an open relationship to help us. You wanted it so you could keep sleeping around and feel good about it. You thought I'd be stupid enough to buy into your little act. But the truth is, I've known about you and your lover for weeks. Hell, even Ryan knew." Her eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw true fear flash across her face. She realized this wasn't some impulsive outburst, not a moment of anger. This was calculated. I had waited, planned, and now I was taking control. She opened her mouth, probably to make excuses or beg, but I cut her off. "Don't even try to spin this as some noble attempt to fix our marriage," I said, shaking my head in disgust. "You lied to me. You cheated. And when you got caught, you tried to turn it around and act like it was for our benefit. It's pathetic. And now, it's over." She took a step toward me, her hands trembling. "I made a mistake, okay? We both made mistakes. But we can fix this," she pleaded, her voice cracking under the weight of her desperation. "I can fix this. We don't have to throw everything away," Sophie begged, her voice raw with desperation. The rage I had been suppressing flared up again, but I swallowed it down. I'd been angry for too long, and I wasn't about to let it consume me any further. This needed to end clean, final, and simple. "There's nothing left to fix," I said, my voice cold and steady. "I don't trust you anymore, and without trust, there's no marriage. I'm done." Sophie broke down, tears streaming as she pleaded and tried to explain herself. She told me how she'd felt trapped in the marriage, how the affair was her way of feeling alive again. But none of it mattered. Every word she said sounded hollow, like lines from a tired script designed to manipulate me into staying. I wasn't playing along. Not anymore. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her sobbing on the bed. I started packing my things, my movements mechanical, my mind numb. It all felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life unravel while I methodically folded shirts and placed them into a suitcase. The yelling had stopped. The fighting was over. It was done. The revenge I had carefully orchestrated had been satisfying in the moment. But now that the dust was settling, all I felt was emptiness. I cut off contact with both Sophie and Olivia. I didn't want to hear more apologies, explanations, or excuses. As far as I was concerned, they were both gone from my life for good. Sophie, for obvious reasons. Olivia, she may have been dragged into this mess because of my manipulation, but she'd crossed the line. There was no going back from that. The divorce process was brutal, but it moved quickly. Sophie fought it at first, clinging to the idea that something between us could still be salvaged. But eventually, she realized there was no saving what had already been destroyed. We split everything down the middle. I didn't care about the house or the money. I just wanted out. Every conversation with her lawyer felt like peeling away another layer of my old life, shedding it piece by piece until there was nothing left but the raw bones of who I used to be. In the end, we signed the papers. Just like that, it was over. You'd think I would have felt victorious, right? I had set my plan in motion, gotten my revenge, exposed her for the liar she was, and walked away without looking back. But the truth? When it was all finalized, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt empty. All the anger, all the hatred I'd been carrying around for weeks had burned out, leaving behind a hollow space I didn't know how to fill. The revenge had been sweet, yes, but it didn't take away the pain. It didn't erase the betrayal or the years we'd spent building something together. It didn't heal the trust that had been shattered. None of it could ever be fixed. I realized then that revenge wasn't the answer. It hadn't healed the wounds. It had only made them harder to face. And now all that was left was the aftermath. A life I barely recognized. A future that felt uncertain at best. In the heat of the moment, the revenge had been satisfying. But as the days passed, I saw it for what it really was, a temporary distraction. It hadn't brought back the years we'd shared, and it hadn't repaired the damage. That part of my life was gone, and nothing I could do would ever bring it back. I spent a lot of time thinking about everything. Our marriage, the way things had gone so wrong, and how I'd let myself get to this point. I used to love Sophie. Maybe a part of me still did. But that love had been twisted, warped by her lies and betrayal. I wasn't the same person I'd been when we first met, and she wasn't the woman I'd married. Looking at it all from the other side, I finally understood what had to happen. The only way forward was to let go. Not just of Sophie, but of all of it. The anger, the resentment, the bitterness. Holding on to it wasn't doing me any good anymore. It was just dragging me down. If I was ever going to move on, I had to release it all. So I did. I walked away from the wreckage of that part of my life, leaving behind Sophie and everything that came with her. It wasn't easy. It wasn't neat. But it was necessary. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt like I had control again. I was free. And yet, even as I started to rebuild, a lingering question gnawed at me. Was it worth it? Maybe I'll be asking myself that for years to come. After the divorce was finalized, I found myself sitting across from Ryan at a bar. We clinked our beers together, shaking our heads at the sheer craziness of the past few months. "Man," Ryan said, laughing, "I still can't believe you pulled all that off. I hated everything about it. How carefully I had set it all up, how it had played out exactly as I planned." Ryan shook his head, still in disbelief. "Man, I still can't believe you really did it. You made her pay," he said, his voice filled with a mix of admiration and amazement. I chuckled along with him, but the laughter didn't feel the way I thought it would. Sure, there was satisfaction, but deep down it didn't feel like a victory. It didn't give me the sense of triumph I had expected. Still, we laughed together, as if we were talking about someone else's story. Some wild, dramatic plotline that didn't actually involve me. "So, what's next for you?" Ryan asked, leaning back in his chair and studying me carefully. The question lingered, and for the first time I didn't have an answer. I'd spent so much time focused on Sophie, on revenge, on making her pay, that I hadn't thought about what came next. The only thing I knew was that I wasn't ready to dive into another relationship. The very idea of getting involved with someone after everything I'd been through was revolting. "I think I'm just going to be by myself for a while," I said, taking a slow sip of my beer.
No relations, chips. No drama.
"I need to figure things out. I need space to breathe." Ryan nodded, his expression understanding. "Yeah, that makes sense, man. After everything, you deserve some peace." That word, peace, stuck with me. It had been so long since I truly felt it. For years, I'd been tied down by Sophie's secrets, by the lies, by all the mess she'd created. Now, for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't weighed down by someone else's baggage. I could focus on myself. And that felt good. I didn't need someone else to make me happy. I needed to find that within myself. In the months that followed, I threw myself into my work. My career became my focus, my outlet, my distraction from everything that had happened. I started working out again, going to the gym regularly, rediscovering hobbies I hadn't touched in years. Slowly but surely, I started to figure out who I was outside of the marriage, outside of Sophie. It was a strange process, realizing just how much of my identity had been tied to her and the life we'd built together. Now that she was gone, it was like I'd been handed a second chance. A chance to start over, to rebuild from scratch. The thought of getting involved with someone new didn't even cross my mind. I wasn't ready. Betrayal leaves scars, and I wasn't about to let anyone get close enough to hurt me again. Trust? That was a foreign concept to me now, and I wasn't in any rush to rebuild it. For the first time in a long time, I was content being alone. Ryan and I stayed close, meeting up now and then to laugh about the craziness of the past few months. But there was an unspoken understanding between us. I was different now. The man who had once been so open, so trusting, was gone. In his place was someone more cautious, more guarded. And while that might sound sad, It wasn't. It was survival. It was me learning to protect myself from the kind of pain Sophie had caused. As for Sophie, she became nothing more than a distant memory. Once the divorce was finalized, I cut all contact, no texts, no calls, nothing. To me, she was a chapter of my life that had been closed for good. I didn't care what she was up to. The same went for Olivia. She had played her part, sure, but I didn't want anything to do with her either. I was done with both of them. Revenge had felt sweet in the moment, but in the end, it didn't fill the hole Sophie's betrayal had left. It didn't heal the wounds or restore the trust. What it gave me was closure, a way to finally walk away from something that had been draining me for so long. And while it didn't feel like the grand victory I'd imagined, I came to understand that it had been necessary. In the months that followed, I found peace in the simple things, the things I used to take for granted. Going to work, hitting the gym, playing my guitar, going for long runs. These were the things that started to put me back together, piece by piece. I didn't need Sophie. I didn't need anyone else. I was learning how to be content with just me. That was the biggest lesson I took from all of it. The betrayal, the revenge, the chaos. It's all painful, it's all complicated. But in the end, it taught me something valuable. I didn't need anyone else to make me whole. I didn't need to rebuild what had been broken. All I needed was to move forward, to focus on my life, my work, and finding peace within myself. For the first time in a long time, I had that peace. No more lies, no more manipulation, no more drama. Just me, my life, and that was enough.